Thunderproof mantle. Thunderproof mantle. Thunderproof thunder. Let me go! Please! Please, Rajang! Please! 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 What am I supposed to do against this thing? At least I have feline insurance. If it wasn't obvious by the intro, I was terrified to fight Rajang in this game. I was absolutely scared because I have not fought Rajang in any game except for Rise. And all I've heard is that Rise Rajang kind of sucks. Rise Rajang is significantly nerfed. Rise Rajang is not the Rajang that you think that you know. And I just gotta say that I feel like most of the discussion videos around Rajang and Rise are a little outdated. And I don't really see anyone talking about Rajang in a post-Sunbreak world. They're all on his high rank variant, which I already found kind of weird that people just instantly started dicking on him the moment that he came out, when Rise was a high rank game and Sunbreak was the master rank expansion. I just always found that a very weird argument, because high rank, like, are we really going to compare high rank to master rank stuff? And people do address this, that they do give the benefit of the doubt, saying that, yeah, Rajang is high rank, we get it, but I'm just like, but nothing. So Sunbreak has come to a close. So if it does, I get that, you guys will see what I get there, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, because right now, I just want to do, you guys seem to like the Namiel video, so I just want to do another discussion video around Rajang, because like I said, I just want to see for myself, is Rajang really that much weaker in Rise? But before we get to Rise, let's talk about his incarnation in World, because let me just say that they did Rajang justice, because if I'm understanding this correctly, Rajang was the first title update monster to be introduced into the game. So to make Rajang one of the legendary monsters that instills fear into all hunters across the land, I think that was probably a good thing to do, because he's not quite an Elder Dragon. So you always want to introduce a monster that's pretty powerful, but not too overpowered. I believe in Sunbreak, our first title update monster was Seething Basil Juice. And I felt like that was a pretty good choice, because again, he was another invader. He was another monster from the previous game that people enjoyed. Well, I don't know how people feel about Basil Juice altogether, but he's another invader that comes to ruin your day. So I feel like that was a pretty good addition. I feel like he was a nice transition into what was to come. So putting in base Rajang, I feel like that was a good move. And let me just say, before I even get into the fight itself, let me just say that the setup for this fight, just the tone that this hunt presents, is just fear, because it's even if you don't know anything about Rajang, is that he's just a normal monster. And they make this very clear, that this entire time you've been hunting Elder Dragons. You've been hunting monsters that are significantly stronger than Rajang is. It's like, it almost seems like a downgrade in a sense. It's like, we go from fighting Elder Dragons to fighting the final boss to just a little monkey. That's how we're starting off the post game. But this is what I just love about video games. So let me tell you something, okay? I feel like Rajang's theme is just iconic. Music has that effect on people, that if something is so traumatic in a video game, that the song that's playing in the background becomes associated with that trauma. Think about Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Think about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. These are games that have very traumatic moments in them. And all you have to do is just play the song associated with that trauma, and everything starts flooding back. And I think that's just what Rajang does. That his theme, the moment you hear it, because there's one thing that someone always told me is that I always kind of wondered why certain monsters have unique themes and why some monsters don't. And someone told me that if a monster has a unique theme, that's usually the indicator that they were a flagship monster at one point. And so far, that's come to be true. The only times that I feel like that's not the case are with invader species. And invader species are pretty much monsters that come to just ruin your day. So I feel like everyone remembers back in high rank in Monster Hunter World, where you're hunting that Rathian for the first time and then Basilgeuse shows up. That's just a core memory, a core trauma in high rank that is just instilled, that just sticks with people for so long. I don't really have that memory with Basilgeuse, because when he appeared for the first time in World, I had already played Rise. I fought Basilgeuse, like I knew him like the back of my hand. I've fought my fair share of Basilgeuse. I've never found him too difficult, because personally I feel like Basilgeuse's difficulty comes from the unpredictability of when his scales are going to fall off, and just the blast and his dive bomb that nukes the area. I feel like once you get a grasp on that and how all of that works, Basilgeuse is kind of pushed over. But that's just me. I've never really struggled with him. That's just my personal opinion. So even though I had underpowered gear and I could have very easily been one-shot by Basilgeuse at that point in the game, he just wasn't that threatening to me. I say that like I didn't die, and it took me quite a while to get all of his gear to make the power charms in World. But I'm getting off topic here. I'm getting very off topic. My point is that when you hear music associated with a monster and a Monster Hunter, that's usually an important monster. But Rajang is not a flagship. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Rajang was a flagship monster in any game. So that's just to show you that he is that important. He's on that same power level of monsters that are flagships, that were title, that were selling points of that game. That's just to show you this is the monster we're dealing with here. And I haven't even talked about the fight at all in World. I haven't even talked about the setup. Just the fear that they instill before the fight even begins is just that this is not a monster you want to mess around with. There is literally a cutscene of Rajang clapping an Elder Dragon that you have to fight. And spoilers for my playthrough, I almost carded to Kieran. I almost triple carded to that Kieran that Rajang clapped. So if I could barely beat the Kieran, and I see this guy get murked in a cutscene, this guy gets murked in a cutscene, and then I have to fight him next, that they make you fight the monster that Rajang is clapping, just so you understand the monster you're dealing with, which I feel like is a very good thing. Because I mean, Kieran, you may or may not have fought him in your adventures in high and master rank, because it's a unicorn. So just like actual unicorns in mythology, they're rare, they're elusive, and you may never actually encounter one. But if you go out your way to seek one out, then you will find one. So you may or may not have fought a Kieran, which I found was very good. This is the first time where Kieran was tied to a main quest, where you're forced to fight one. So I think that's what really did it for me, is that I really hadn't fought a Kieran. I mean, I fought a couple of them. I fought a couple in the event quest and the Arch-Tempered Kieran quest back in high rank. But overall, I've not fought Kieran all that much. So to force the player to fight a master rank Kieran, which they may or may not have encountered, is a good way to just set the power level of what's to come. So when Rajang comes out and claps him in a cutscene, you know that he's about business. And let me just say, he does not disappoint in riding that momentum. I think that what makes Rajang the hardest in World are two main things. Well, three. Because I mean, the human brain likes to pair things in threes. So I'll give you 3 reasons. The first reason is that he chains his attacks so effortlessly. Very effortlessly at almost. And it's just very hard to find an opening. And keep in mind, I'm doing this with dual blades, so I'm not using a slow weapon. Dual blades are pretty mobile and that we have a lot of auto dodge in our moveset. We have the clutch claw that can and I'll get on that. But we have a lot of movement options, a lot more movement options than some of the weapons in this game. So if we are barely finding a way to get an opening, how is something like a charge blade supposed to get in? Or how is something like a gun lance supposed to move against Rajang? That's something that, you guys know, if you guys have been watching my Monster Hunter World playthrough, that I'm pretty much switching between charge blade and dual blade. I would not dare fight Rajang with a charge blade. I'm not that ballsy, okay? I don't want to know what that fight is like. I know it's a piss poor matchup in Rise. We haven't even got to Rise yet. But I would never fight Rajang with a charge blade in World. But that's one of the main things, that there aren't too many monsters in World that just relentlessly chain their attacks together. Usually, that monsters in World, that they're either these massive beasts that cover a lot of area just by their sheer size, but at the same point, they can't cover everything just because of how big they are. It's that whole mentality, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. It's just that they cannot physically cover everything. Like, they can't cover behind them because they're so big, they can't really move that fast. If you go behind them and you whip behind them, it's gonna take them a minute to turn around. So that's one thing about monsters, that sometimes just you being a tiny little hunter is more of an advantage as it is a disadvantage, more times than not. Rajang is a tiny monster, so that goes out the window. He's able to whip if you go behind him, because that's one of his weak points is his tail. He can easily whip around. Like, oh, what's up? You trying to hit my tail? I bet. Does a 360 spin, grabs you, does a pin attack, and hyper beams you in the face for it. There's like, when you find an opening, he's able to react to you, exploit that opening so fast and so much more than other monsters that it's kind of insane. And he already combos his attacks so effortlessly, so even though he has quote-unquote openings, it's very hard to exploit them. Secondly, Iceborne's entire thing is that they pretty much want you to use the clutch claw as much as possible. They beat it over your head that the clutch claw is the way to go. Clutch claw is the way of the future. Make sure that you use the clutch claw. Don't worry. I will talk about the clutch claw. That's a video for another day. But for argument's sake, you guys have seen me. You guys have seen my playthrough. If you haven't, there's an entire playlist on it. I'll link it in the description down below. But I've got pretty adept with the clutch claw. I've learned how to wall bang with it. I've learned how to flinch shot. I've learned how to tenderize, how to use slinger ammos, and yeah, I pretty much understand the clutch claw pretty well. So I want to say I'm kind of sort of intermediate with the clutch claw. So I kind of have incorporated it into my hunting style. I've kind of adapted it, and that it has been a very suitable replacement to wire bugs. So yeah, that's a thing as well, that keep that in mind, that the clutch claw is a pretty important way on how I move around and catch up to monsters to compensate for the fact that I don't use wire bugs. Some people say that I use the clutch claw kind of like a wire bug, but I'm a Rise baby, so what do you want from me? But yeah, that's just something that Rajang just says no to. For one, you typically want to clutch claw onto a weak point, which you want to clutch claw onto weak points because you want to tenderize those parts. And for dual blades, since it's a light weapon, you have to clutch claw onto a specific part at least twice to tenderize it. Versus heavy weapons, they only have to do it on one and done. Bada bing, bada boom, they're done. It's not really the case for dual blades. So you already have to find 2 times to clutch onto the same exact body part, where he's flying around the place, throwing down spirit bombs, shooting hyper beams, pinning your little frail hunter body against a boulder. So it's not already hard. It's already pretty hard to find one. So you take that into account, and then keep in mind the way that you do clutch shots or wall bangs, and then you have to clutch onto their head. You have to, if you clutch onto any other part of their body, then you're dead. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You physically cannot clutch onto any other part except the head. Not Rajang. You can't clutch onto his head. You physically cannot. If you try to clutch onto his head, then it just bounces off. Then you're gone. You're gone. GG's. So what you have to do instead, which the cutscene pretty cleverly hints at, and it pretty cleverly sets up, that you have to clutch onto his arms. And then they even give you a freebie that they do the seamless cutscene transition, that you're automatically clutched onto his arm. If he has slinger ammo on you, you can instantly, you're pretty close to a wall, so you can just sling him straight into a wall, and that's your setup that this is how you fight this monster, which is pretty clever. It's pretty good game design. Gotta give them props on that one. They give you one freebie. They give you one freebie. But trying to do that again? Yeah, good luck getting that off twice, because also, in certain animations, if you try to clutch onto his arm, if he's swinging his arms, he can then grab the clutch claw and put you instantly into a pin attack and continue his chain. So sometimes it's a trap that if you try to clutch onto him, he will grab the clutch claw, pin you down, and continue his combo that you were just trying to interrupt. So a lot of times you gotta be very careful trying to, you've been conditioned to clutch onto the monster and use flinch shots because that's your main source of damage. But you have to be careful in this fight because he can just straight up yoink it and just say, "Get over here!" and then just completely invalidate it. I don't know what you want from me. So that's another difficulty aspect, that they made one of the core mechanics of the game a detriment to the fight, which is just, wow. That was something that I had not heard of. That was something new to me. But yeah. The third thing about Rajang is that he is always a menace, and he is always a force to be respected. I think that one of the best things about this game is the phenomenon of turf wars. And when Rajang goes to do a turf war, that can go a 50-50. Sometimes it's kind of like you just kind of lay back, you let the monsters do their thing, you find a bush to hide in, you find a log to kind of crawl under, you let the monsters fight it out. Pretty much just go full Godzilla and let them fight. That's kind of how you have to you kind of just gotta let nature take a score sometimes. But a turf war with Rajang, it rarely ever ends well for the other monster. So it's just a little small thing that you can kind of rely on. You can kind of rely on turf wars to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you and damage. But against Rajang, I mean, Rajang's not invincible. Like, there are times where there are times where he will get clapped and the monster will be able to overpower him. But a lot of times, especially in that first hunt that I did, that wasn't really the case. And I had to do a lot of thinking on the fly to get out of a lot of those situations. So overall, my thoughts on World Rajang was just a lot of times I just had to sheath my weapon and just run. I tried so many different options, so many different avenues. I can't wait for you guys to see that video. If you guys are watching this, you guys are probably watching this before the playthrough's even over. But if you guys are watching this at some point in the future, there should be an iCard to go watch my first fight with Rajang in World. And keep in mind that I'm doing this fight understanding how Rajang functions as a monster. I know that he channels his blood to his fist when he's enraged. And that means that that your attacks can now bounce off of him. That's another thing, that his arms, they're his strength and his weakness. So you have to respect them, but you also have to exploit them. It's a very weird balancing act. And these are things that I all understand about Rajang. I understand how Rajang works as a monster. But despite my prior knowledge, this fight was not very forgiving. It pretty much demanded you to understand how this fight works and to respect him as a monster, but to not just curl up in a corner and just cry. And if this is just base Rajang, this is just Rajang in base level. This isn't his Super Saiyan form. And I have heard war stories on Furious Rajang. I have heard the outcries of how Furious Rajang almost broke Iceborne in half. So if this is the standard the regular monster is setting, I am terrified of what fresh carnage awaits me when I get to Furious Rajang. Remember, if you guys want to see that, that's sometime in the future, once I've restored my pride and restored my honor to my family. But yeah, that's gonna be something. That's all I can. I don't even have words. That's all I can really say about Furious Rajang. Now here comes the tricky one. World Rajang was terrifying, and Rajang in World went from Rajang to Rajunk. Or did he? Now, you guys might say that this is a little cheating, that I'm not using a regular Master Rank Rajang, because at first I was gonna do an anomaly Rajang, but then that would be more akin to tempered Rajang, and that'd be a whole argument for itself. So I'm just doing an event quest, because this one is actually the hazard quest. And what hazard quests basically are is that they're the same monster. They're not a variant, they're not a deviant, they're not a rare species, they're not a subspecies. They're literally the base monster. The only reason why they have a different name is because the difficulty has been set up a little bit to give players who seek out a challenge, they give them that challenge. That's the only difference between this Rajang and a Hazard Rajang. But this is, for all intents and purposes, a Master Rank Rajang. So I say all this to say that I do feel it, that definitely, I can say very confidently that if you fight an anomaly Rajang, yeah, I actually do have did record some footage for an anomaly Rajang. That's why I was initially gonna put footage right here, but then I realized, like I said, I didn't want to do the tempered. I didn't want people to bring up tempered Rajang and then open that can of worms. So probably still opening that can of worms, but not just doing a baseline Master Rank Rajang, because that's basically what I fought, just a baseline Master Rank Rajang in World. But this is what we're going with. So a couple of things that are a little different about World Rajang, because the only real difference that I've really noticed about this Rajang is that he just gets enraged a lot more, and he goes into his Super Saiyan form more easily. That's really the main difference that I see. And I want to say that the main thing that is different about Rajang, or at least this Rajang specifically, because I feel like if you have this problem with Rajang, or you have this difficulty, that you want to see the Rajang that you got bodied by. So that's also what I'm going about with this quest, because I feel like the people who want Rajang to be a threat and want that challenge would probably be satisfied with this Rajang right here. So, or that's what at least we're trying to answer. But definitely I can see that the main difference between World Rajang, and this is a pretty big difference that I didn't really touch on in the World section, is Rajang's tremors. I know that that's pretty controversial, because I have heard people's takes on how tremors may or may not have been a little overtuned in World, because that's the first thing I know about World, is that when you get tremored, you get tremored. Like you were stuck in place for about 6-7 seconds. It's horrendous. But when you get stuck in a tremor here, you might be stuck for about a second or two, and then you're back in the fray. So that's the main thing that I noticed, is that Rajang combos into the tremors. And here, that's not really a thing. that because tremors don't last as long, that he doesn't really capitalize on them because there's really no time. So he might do a ground pound and then he'll just go on to his next attack. And that leads into my next point, that he really doesn't chain his attacks. Like, you'll notice that sometimes it's like he's seemingly aiming at nothing. If you look at what's going on right now, it's like, I'm not sure if he's getting confused by our hunter just moving so fast, but in World, it was very consistently that Rajang was just chasing you down. But here it's like, sometimes it's like, bro, where are you aiming? And I think this comes to the other thing that I'm going to bring up. The wire bugs. Like I said, one of the main things about Rajang is that what I feel like what made him so special in World is that he was able to trivialize the main mechanic of World. And yes, I know you still have mantles and Rajang. You could use your mantles against Rajang, pretty much no problem. But the clutch claw, the thing that they've been hinting at, is the one thing that made Rajang feel so much different than all the other monsters. And that they just didn't do anything without the wire bug. Like, I don't know, maybe when you try to wire bug into Rajang, maybe he catches the wire bug and then he flings at you, and then maybe like when he does with the clutch claw, like when he grabs the clutch claw and he throws it in the ground, then he uses that to extend his combo. Maybe if Rajang catches your wire bug and then he extends his combo, maybe that wire bug, you're just down a wire bug for maybe like 30-40 seconds. And that's just 30-40 seconds where you had to deal with Rajang like how you did back in World. You just gotta sheath your weapon and run for your life. But there's never really a time like that at the end of the day, you can just kind of wire bug and just confuse him. That as fast as he is, he does get confused at times. But it's a weird thing though, because while I feel like he's a little bit more easy to overwhelm, when he is on top of you, that he does realize that you are just as fast as him. But there's still one trick that up Rajang's sleeve that you have over him. I mean, that he has over you. Range. If you haven't noticed, this boy spams his hyper beams like no business. I want to say that maybe in World, he didn't really use his hyper beams unless I was like a little far away, or I was trying to get away from him, and then he'll use his hyper beam to snipe, or even worse, he'll use his hyper beam to destroy traps, because yes, that did happen. He literally used his little spear bomb, electric bomb, to destroy my trap. So he does do that, but while he's doing that, that also means that this is coming from his mouth. He's always facing towards you. And that may not seem like a big deal, but it kind of is. Especially in a fight like this, where he's always facing you, that makes it very hard to, one, cut his tail, which is what will allow you to turn off his Super Saiyan form, but also that his hands, where he puts all the blood in his hands, that there are just times where you'll just tink, like what's happening on screen right now, that you'll just tink off of them, and he will use his arms as shields. And when you tink, he's like, oh ho ho, you have activated my trap card. And then he'll just go on his assault. So you really have to be careful when you're attacking him. I mean, I guess you can't use things like Mind's Eye to negate that, but it's just those little changes that really does make Rajang feel like a different kind of threat. That he went from a more aggressive monster that just gets in your face and beats your frail little body, until like someone who's is a kind of almost a mid-range fighter, I'd say. That if you get up in his grill too close, because he just knows that you're fast, he'll then position himself away. And when he does that you have to get in close. But keep in mind that Rajang is still a fast monster. So even if you want to preserve your wire bugs and you don't want to zip over there to catch him in time, if you run over there, more than likely by the time you get to him, he's going to be somewhere else. So you kind of have to use your wire bugs to catch up to him, And because he's keeping this space between you and him, that by the time you catch up to him, your wire bugs might just very well be gone. And then when you're fighting him without your wire bugs, then you get the world experience. You fall into his domain. So I feel like it's a very unique thing. And again, maybe this is a downside of using the hazard quest, but this is what, like I said, that this is what people wanted. That in high rank, he just didn't change attacks at all. Like, there was very rarely times where I felt like I was fighting Rajang because he was chaining his attacks together, and then he was just this behemoth that would just chase you to the ends of the earth. I just didn't feel that in high rank, and a lot of people didn't either. His tremors were non-existent. He didn't change attacks together. We were significantly faster, and like I said, now he does keep up with us pretty much. Like, he does kind of go toe to toe with our hunters. So I want to say that they kind of succeeded in that sense. That it's a weird little balancing act where they don't directly nerf your wire bugs, but because he keeps so much space between you and him, that he forces you to use your wire bugs to just keep up with him. And then when you're in close quarters, that 1v1 situation, that's when things get interesting. And I kind of do like that dance. It's an interesting dance that you're both that you can keep up with him, and then it's like the two of you are dancing between each other. That it's almost kind of a sight to behold. That we're both blitzing between them, and then with all the busted skills you have in this game, like I have infinite stamina from Furious Rajang, that we're just kind of dancing. It's just that when he does go in, that he's like, all right, you want to go, Rajang? Let's go. It's kind of like you guys are just going at each other like an anime fight or something. It really is kind of fun. And it's a different experience from Rajang. Sure, you're not terrified of him, and I get that. But at the same time, it's just fun. It really is just fun. And then when you keep into account that now you have the different hunter arts, well, I call them hunter arts, but the switch skills where you can switch between different play styles, that I can go between my aerial dual blades and grounded dual blades, and then also you can swap skill to use that as a evade. It really is just fun. So he went from probably a monster that you should be afraid of to a monster you just love to fight. And I feel like it really works here, because one complaint that I have about Rajang is that you can just kind of invalidate him with Raider Rides. Because Raider Rides are pretty much that in world, when a turf war happens, you just gotta kind of hold your ground and just kind of let them do their thing. In Rise, when a turf war happens, it's kind of a benefit, and there's no real fear at all. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the turf war, one is going to go into a mountable ride state, and then you can use that to get more damage. And if Rajang loses the turf war, Rajang becomes wireable, all you gotta do is ram into the other monster, ride the other monster, and they get damaged that way. It really is just a way that it just kind of invalidates that, which is why I really love him here, is that I feel like this is peak Rise Rajang. That Hazard Rajang is probably as good as we're gonna get, but at the end of the day, I still do gotta give it to World. That as much as I love Rise and as much as I love the wire bugs and how everything is, I do think that a level of difficulty was lost. Like I said, World Rajang, he invalidates the Clutch Claw. Like, it's not invalidated completely. You still gotta utilize it to wallbang, and wallbang is one of your main sources of damage. But I don't know, it just doesn't really hit the same. Then you also keep him to the tremors, that the tremors don't really feel as impactful. He can't combo off those anymore. And now he's like a mid-range fighter because he can't really keep up with you. I don't know. This is where I would like to hear you guys' opinions on this, because like I said, I don't really hear too much discussion, and this is minor, but also I just feel like how Rajang had that very cool setup. Rise just doesn't have that. That's just non-existent. Like, just showing that Rajang is able to go toe-to-toe with Elder Dragons and making you fight that Kieran beforehand, that really set the tone for the type of power level Rajang is. Here, he's just another monster. There is no setup, and there's no cutscene before you fight him, and I feel like World just did him justice and put him on that. Before, it was kind of like it was hinted at because the monsters didn't really interact with one another before World. But World was when we got to see Rajang in full action, and Rise just kind of wrote that momentum with Turf Wars that he really does just kind of rule, like he is the master of his own territory. So I don't want to say that that Rise Rajang is terrible because, like I said, his fight is very fun. In World, his fight is terrifying. In Rise, his fight's just fun. And this is specifically talking about Anomaly, but in the end game, you're pretty much only fighting Anomaly monsters anyway. So I don't think that I do think that initial encounter, like, I can't even remember my first encounter with Mastering Rajang. Everyone's experience with Mastering always goes to either Astalos, fighting the Three Lords, or fighting Shigar Magala. Those are the fights that people consider were the hardest in the Mastering expansion. And while I'm pretty sure that that's just the Elder Dragons taking the spotlight, it still is a little sad, and it doesn't change the fact that Rajang, that just how monster fights work, what are they called? They're not called Turf Wars. The Wyvern Rides, yeah. It's just that how Wyvern Rides work that Invader Species cannot work. And that's kind of why I'm glad Devil Joe ain't here, because I don't know, when Devil Joe shows up, I always, like, my heart always skips a beat. And that's just the nature of that. Just Wyvern Rides, as cool as they are, they really just ruined this entire archetype that they can't really function or be what they were supposed to be. But at the end of the day, which one do I prefer? I gotta really say that, yeah, I kind of gotta agree with the general public that I think that World did it a little better. It's just that it's one of those things like the entire package, that the immersion, the setup, the actual hunt itself, and just making those memorable moments that it's really just seems like it was just that the developers made this stuff in response to the community, which isn't a bad thing. It is a wonderful thing when developers listen to their community and listen to their fan base and address issues that they're saying. But it comes at the expense that the initial encounter I don't know, it's like I didn't need a quest to make Rajang feel threatening in World. You know what I'm saying? Or I didn't need to wait until I fought Tempered Rajang to feel why this monster is important. And I feel like that's just one thing that's all that really needs to be said, that you only get, at the end of the day, you only get one first impression. So people who are complaining about Rajang and High Ring, that's their first encounter with Rajang. They chose to put Rajang in High Ring. If they wanted to do him right, they could have just waited until the expansion and put him in with the expansion. But no, they chose to put him in High Ring, this legendary monster, and the result was that he would just felt like another monster. And he really didn't have that impact on my friends. Like, I mean, I have Rajang stories that our first encounter with Rajang, it is a story behind it. But at the end of the day, we did it on our first try, and we had one cool moment, and that was kind of it, which is a little sad. Because World players, you guys have this amazing experience that you have this amazing encounter with Rajang with cutscenes and build-up, and that's just a title update. Even the title update monsters in Rise, it's just like, oh, new monster, let's go slay it. You go slay it, you get some fancy gear, and that's kind of it. But in World, there's an entire storyline around it. I just find that so fascinating. But all in all, that's all I really gotta say about Rajang. I would let the hunt play out and let you guys see the end of it. I do go through this card list, but also my Elgato did run out of space, so I don't actually have footage of me getting the kill, but trust me when I say I did beat this quest card list. You just gotta trust my word on that one. But yeah, that's
that's all I gotta say is that you guys like these rant videos. And this one is significantly longer than the Namor video. Or I mean, the Namiel video. Holy crap. But I think I've taken up enough of you guys' time. I just wanted to give my thoughts out there on Rise Rajang and World Rajang from a Rise player's perspective. But overall, I think that at the end of the day, that just because he's a little easy, it's just a matter of preference. Do you want a challenging boss fight, or do you want a fun boss fight? And there is no correct answer to that. Because like I said, I had a blast in this quest. Did I have a blast fighting him in World? Not really. But it really does go in line with everything I've pointed out, that it is a core memory that Rajang in World will go down as like the first time I fought Cynthia in Diamond and Pearl. That it will go down as one of these memories that is just a monster or a boss fight that I will never forget. And I don't think I'll say that about Rise, but I will say that it was a fun fight and I enjoyed myself. And sometimes that's all you really need, so just have fun. So that's really where I'm coming at with this. But all that being said, I'm about to get up out. I need to get started editing the finale of the World playthrough, because you guys know what's coming up. You guys know the monsters I'm about to fight. So, but I just did this quest and I just had to talk about it. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening to the end. And yeah, I'm about to get up out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Till then, deuces.